Hello and welcome to the Red Leaf Card, your home for Canadian soccer news and views. Today we're going to be talking about the Northern Super League for the inaugural match of 2025 and also how York United is doing in the Canadian Premier League of match week 21. But first, here's your fixtures rundown. Forge FC defeats Pacific FC 2-0. Calvary FC draws with Valor FC 2 apiece. Atletico Ottawa wins to Vancouver FC 1-0. Halifax Wanderers defeats York United 2-1. In Major League Soccer, DC United defeats Toronto FC 3-1. Whitecaps defeats Austin FC 1-0, and CF Montreal gets defeated by FC Cincinnati 4-1. So now new scenery coming in the year 2025, the Northern Super League coming into Canada for their first division, and a lot of talks coming in of AFC Toronto, of where they're actually playing. So they've announced that they're going to be playing at York Lions Stadium, and a lot of fans actually didn't like where they're going to be playing for their home matches. But as noticed, it's home for York United, the Major League Soccer Next Pro for Toronto FC 2. And yeah, a lot of fans, you could say that a lot of fans do have some criticism that AFC Toronto is going to be playing there. It does struggle to actually gain fans, actually to go there. So, as noticed, if you look at where the Northern Super League teams will be playing, Vancouver Rise FC has not announced where they're going to be playing at home, yet Calgary Wild FC announced that they will be playing at McMahon Stadium, which is home for 35,000 capacity. Halifax Tides announced that they will be playing in Wanderers grounds, which is home for the Halifax Wanderers. And Montreal still has not announced yet where they're going to be playing. And there has been various stadiums that could be possibly their home stadium. But Ottawa Rapid FC announced that they will be playing at TD Place Stadium, which is home for where Atletico Ottawa plays, with a capacity of 24,000. So, yeah, I see that a lot of fans do have some criticism where AFC Toronto is going to be playing for their home matches at York Lions Stadium, which is a low capacity, which is outside of Toronto. Yeah, it does bring in some bells where some fans in Toronto wouldn't be interested for a team that represents Toronto, just they're outside Toronto and doesn't have a popularity area. It doesn't bring in the hype for it. And a lot of fans think that, well, it would be better off that the team would be playing in downtown Toronto. And a lot of fans agree with it. There's a soccer stadium just near BMO Field where Liberty Village is, and kind of agree where the fans are in. So a lot of fans do have this criticism where AFC Toronto is, but it has to be a starting of why is the reason why fans don't like that idea of at York Lions Stadium, and the ownership of AFC Toronto has to give the reasoning that why they didn't pick that stadium where it's located at Liberty Village, and there has to be a lot of renovation for that stadium. And some fans would say probably would actually agree with that, but it's a lot of history about that stadium. A lot of fans also picked the stadium where University of Toronto, for example, the varsity stadium in downtown Toronto for the University of Toronto, and still you have these fans having a lot of back and forth of saying the positive, negatives of where AFC Toronto is going to be located for their home matches. And that's how it is. But for all these other teams, if you want to criticize where they're actually playing, I think Calgary Wild is actually a good example where they're actually playing in. They're going to be playing in a stadium which is more of a football stadium, which is home for a CFL team, and also with a high capacity stadium. Does actually give some ring of bells for Calgary Wild FC. And for example, Ottawa Rise FC, and there's always been criticism for that. But if you look at, for example, the Canadian Premier League team, Atletico Ottawa, you have a lot of history in the past of soccer teams in Ottawa. For example, like I could go to Ottawa Fury, for example. They've been playing there, had a great fan base. Now, Atletico Ottawa being the team to actually come in and be the replacement for Ottawa Fury, they started out really a bad fan base. They started, for example, like 3,000 to 4,000, then 5,000. They actually raised the capacity of their Canadian Premier League. And probably we might see that in the Northern Super League for Ottawa if they could actually bring that capacity. But if it fails to bring in the attendees of fans for Ottawa Rapid FC, brings in that question, is this that stadium to be in? And it also questions for Calgary Wild FC. A lot of fans always question about the empty seats. You look at, for example, Princess Motor Stadium. You have a lot of empty seats for Valor FC in the Canadian Premier League. And if you bring in a Northern Super League team in that stadium, you're going to see a lot of empty seats. And if Vancouver Rise FC actually plays in BC Place, and you have a problem with the capacity with empty seats, does the popularity of the Northern Super League come to question? Is that women's Canadian soccer not have that popularity? And some fans would say it's it's growing and it's a young league. But it questions, how about the 10 years? And you look at the Canadian Premier League, for example. We all know that it's trying to slowly get into that fan capacity of growing to that. And you're going to see Halifax Wanderers. They're going to get a new renovation of the stadium. You're going to have more fans out there to recognize the Canadian Premier League. And sooner or later, you're going to get more teams out there. As noticed, the Northern Super League was supposed to actually get 8 teams and actually didn't do well. So, congrats to the Northern Super League to actually getting 6 teams. Hoping the inaugural match for the year of 2025 does well and see how it goes. But can it do well? And it does bring in some questions also. Do you have a domestic cup? For example, everyone knows that the men's soccer side has the Canadian Championship. You have Toronto FC, Club de Foot Montreal, Vancouver Whitecaps, and all these Canadian Premier League teams, including League One Canada. But I want to see how the domestic cup for the women's side would look like. And I would go to saying for the Canadian Championship on the women's side, you bring in every League One Canada team out there. You have Alberta, you have BC, you have Ontario, and Quebec. You have 4 League One Canada leagues out there. And then now you have 6 teams in the Northern Super League. That's 10 teams right now. But it does question for their side, for the women's, can they actually agree with that to have a domestic cup for that? But I would say, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to actually have a domestic cup for the Canadian like a Canadian Championship, and see how it goes. But it does question for their situation, can they actually do it? And yeah, I think they will do it. But as known as I talked about AFC Toronto, where they're actually be playing, York Lions Stadium, and you have a team for York United. York United right now struggling in the final matches. Right now you have match week of 21. They are not doing really well since they've got defeated by Halifax Wanderers, and they're right now 4th in the table. So 2 points behind of Calgary AFC, and it's not doing really well. First place you have Forge FC and Atletico Ottawa. Calgary FC 3rd. But if you look at down with 5th spot, 6th spot, 7th spot, and 8th spot, right now Halifax Wanderers actually getting close to being 7th. Valor FC right now, they're just 5 points behind of the 5th spot for the playoffs, and probably could actually be in trouble for this season. If York United continues on losing matches, they could actually lose that playoff spot. As noticed that who could actually replace that could be Valor FC at this point. As notice that they do have one more match against Valor. They have one more match against Calgary FC, and including Atletico Ottawa and Pacific FC at home. And it does question, if they lose all those home matches, it could look like that they could actually lose that playoff spot. But now, on Friday, September 6th, they're going to be versing Vancouver FC, and that does question to them. It's going to be a panic mode for them. And I know that lots of fans do question Ben Himura at this point. You look at the Halifax Wanderers match, you didn't have Brian Wright and other players that weren't available for that match. And you had Marquez being the first, having his first starting for that match. And now you look at how their performance is doing. It's not doing really well. You look at, sometimes you would say, well, don't worry about this match. We're like 6 points ahead of the 5th place team. But if you would say you don't worry about every single match, what if Vancouver FC continues on winning? That is one of the biggest problems right now. You're going to be versing Vancouver FC, and sooner or later, if Vancouver FC continues on doing really well in their last matches, it's going to hit you. It's going to hit you so hard and say, oh, you're going to be in the panic mode to being in that 5th spot of the playoffs. And a lot of fans don't like that. And at this point, you look at Valor FC. They're doing really well to try to get back to that point to being in the playoffs. And Halifax Wanderers, how they're doing at home, it really shows how they're doing. So, in my opinion, right now, how York United is doing, it shows some of that point that the bottom 3 teams still have a chance to be in the playoffs. And you look at it, Halifax Wanderers, they're actually 12 points behind in running. So basically, if they get four more wins in the table, they could actually make it. And if you look at Valor FC, 5 points behind. If all the other teams not do well against Valor FC, there you go. Valor FC could go above Vancouver FC. But if York United doesn't do really well against their opposing teams, Valor FC could take it. And it's the same thing to Pacific FC and Halifax Wanderers. If they don't do well against all their matches for their 7 matches against the teams that are on the bottom, you might actually see some upsets. Like, for example, if Calvary FC does not do really well, if you don't see York United doing well, Vancouver FC, you might see some swaps of positions of who's in the standings, and probably might be in the playoffs. As noticed, the biggest upset right now is Pacific FC. They didn't do really well, and you look at that of how they're performing. It does question of coaching, the roster that they have, and how they're going to come back. And we always looked at Patrice Geyser, for example, how he performed in the starting of the season of the Canadian Premier League. It does show he's now coming back to actually play really well. And it's like Phil DeSantis, for example. He didn't do really well in the first 5 matches. He gave something to the fans at playing away and then coming back with one win for their first home match at Princess Motor Stadium. So I think like you have to give some credit how Valor FC is doing right now in this season. And I think Valor FC has been this team that you would say, oh, there's some slips, there's some points that they can make it to the playoffs. And there is some teams that you really actually didn't want in the playoffs. And you just say, oh, I don't like this team coming in the playoffs. I wish some of the teams have a chance to be in the playoffs for the first time. And the only team that didn't make the playoffs is Valor FC. You know, there's also another team that has not even made the playoffs. It's Vancouver FC, and it's their second season. Well, now it's those two teams to shine in their final 7 matches. So let's see how it goes in the final 7 matches for all these 6 teams. And Halifax Wanderers and Pacific FC, their final 8 matches in the Canadian Premier League. And that's full time of the Red Leaf Card. I'm your host, Jacob, subbing out.